I had spent weeks preparing for my grandson's birthday lunch, hoping that this would be the day when our family would come together. The house was filled with the smell of my famous roast, and the table was perfectly set. Every chair was in place, every detail accounted for. I thought this would be the day I'd finally see my family close to me again. As I stood in the kitchen, arranging the last of the dishes, I heard laughter coming from the dining room. My heart swelled. This was it, the moment I had waited for. But when I entered the room, everything froze. There, standing with a glass in her hand, was my daughter-in-law, Evelyn. With a bright smile, she lifted her glass and looked straight at me. "To the old lady who's going to," her voice trailed off, and the room fell silent. My stomach dropped. I had heard that tone before. The sharpness in her voice, the coolness in her eyes. It wasn't a joke, not this time. I stood there for a moment, my hands shaking slightly as I held onto the edge of the doorframe. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, but Evelyn's eyes were the only ones that mattered. She had made it clear, again, that I wasn't truly part of this family. I had spent years loving and caring for this family, but now, it felt like I was invisible. The tension in the air was thick, but I kept my composure. I didn't let them see the hurt. Not today, not in front of my grandson. I forced a smile, nodded, and quietly took my seat. But inside, something was shifting. Something had broken. And as the lunch continued around me, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this go. Not this time. The rest of the lunch passed in an eerie silence, the laughter that had once filled the room now absent. I kept my eyes focused on my plate, trying to ignore the looks, the awkwardness, the way everyone else seemed to go on with their lives while I sat there, trapped in the moment. Evelyn kept glancing at me, her expression unreadable, but I could feel the coldness radiating from her. She had made her mark, and now, I was just supposed to pretend everything was fine. I was better than that. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to smooth over the cracks in our family. But this time, something inside me snapped. I had never realized just how much I had allowed myself to be walked on, to be treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. After the meal, I excused myself quietly, telling them I had to rest. I could feel their eyes following me, but I didn't care anymore. I made my way to my bedroom, the house feeling colder with every step. Once inside, I closed the door behind me, locked it, and sat on the bed, staring at the walls. How had I let this happen? How had I allowed Evelyn to treat me like I didn't matter? My mind raced, the words she had said echoing in my head. To the old lady who's going to, what did that even mean? What had I done to deserve such treatment? I thought back to all the years I had spent with this family, all the sacrifices I had made, all the love I had given. I had helped raise my son, John. I had watched him grow up, and I had always been there for him. And yet, now, it felt like none of that mattered. Evelyn had slipped in, charming her way into John's life, and now she controlled everything. I thought about the way she had subtly undermined me, making decisions without consulting me, pushing me aside whenever I tried to get involved. I had let it happen. I had allowed her to walk all over me, because I wanted to believe that family was about love, not power. But now I saw it clearly. Evelyn wasn't interested in family. She was interested in control. She had no respect for me, for the woman who had raised her husband, who had built a life with him. And John, my own son, had turned a blind eye to it all. It hurt more than I cared to admit, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let her get away with this any longer. I wasn't going to sit quietly and let her take everything I had worked for. I had been patient, but that patience was running out. I stood up and walked over to the dresser, opening the drawer where I kept important papers. My hands trembled as I pulled out a stack of documents, ones that I had kept hidden, ones that John and Evelyn never thought to look at. These papers were my insurance, my way of taking back control. I had to act carefully, I knew that. I couldn't rush this, but I had to make sure that they knew who they were dealing with. I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. I was still sharp, still capable of taking care of myself. And I was going to make sure they knew that. I spent the next few hours quietly planning my next move. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't want them to know until it was too late. But as I sat there, looking at the papers in front of me, I knew one thing for certain. Things were going to change. I wasn't going to let Evelyn or anyone else push me around any longer. I sat quietly at my desk the next morning, the weight of the decision I was about to make pressing down on me like 1,000 tons. The documents I had pulled out the night before lay before me, reminders of a life I had built, a life that was now being threatened by the very people I had trusted the most. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I could hear the faint sounds of the house waking up, the creak of the floorboards as John walked around upstairs, the soft hum of the coffee machine. But inside, I was already in a battle, one that I knew would change everything. I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to be the one who held the family together, but it had all been for nothing. Evelyn had chipped away at me slowly, bit by bit, until I was just a shadow of the person I once was. I had let it happen, but now I was done. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me any longer. I had spent my life giving, sacrificing, loving. But where had that gotten me? Nowhere. It was time to take control. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world seemed so peaceful, so unaware of the storm brewing inside my home. I thought about John, my son. How had he changed so much? When he was younger, he was so full of life, always running to me for comfort when he had a nightmare or when things weren't going right in his world. Now he barely looked at me. He was distant, preoccupied with his life and his family. Evelyn had worked her way into his heart, and now she had him completely. But I wouldn't let her have everything. Not without a fight. I walked back to my desk and picked up the phone. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to wait any longer for them to decide what was best for me. I needed to act, and I needed to act now. I called my lawyer, a man I had known for years, someone who had helped me with my husband's estate. His voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. "Margaret," he said, "I know this isn't easy, but you've got to be strong now. We'll make sure your wishes are respected." I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, feeling a small sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. I had always been the one to sacrifice, to put everyone else's needs before my own. But now, it was time for me to stand up. I knew what I had to do, and I wouldn't let anyone stop me. The next few days passed in a blur. I went about my daily routine, keeping my distance from John and Evelyn. I could feel the tension building in the house, but I refused to let them see how much it was affecting me. I had my plan, and I was going to see it through. On the third day after my phone call, I sat down with my lawyer again. He had drawn up the documents, and I was ready to sign. As I signed my name at the bottom of the page, I felt a sense of finality. This was it. No turning back now. I was taking control of my life again. And this time, no one was going to take that away from me. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet determination. I knew the time was coming, the moment when I would have to confront John and Evelyn about the choices I had made. They hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Their lives continued as they always had, oblivious to the storm that was slowly gathering around them. I had spent decades caring for my family, doing everything in my power to make sure they were happy, healthy, and secure. But now, for the first time, I wasn't thinking about what was best for them. I was thinking about what was best for me. The phone rang on the fourth day, the caller ID showing John's number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Mom," John said, his voice warm but distant, as if he was trying to act like everything was normal. "I was thinking we could get together this weekend. Maybe have dinner at the house." His suggestion was casual, but I could hear the underlying tension in his voice. He had no idea what was coming. "That sounds nice," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We'll see." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. "Listen, I know things have been a little off between us lately, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you, okay?" I could feel the weight of his words, but I wasn't going to let them sway me. I wasn't going to let him make me feel guilty for taking control of my own life. "I appreciate that, John," I said, my voice firm but calm. "But there are some things we need to talk about." I could sense his confusion, but before he could say anything else, I ended the call. It wasn't time yet. I needed to prepare myself, to gather my strength before I faced them both. Over the next few days, I spent a lot of time thinking. I thought about all the years I had spent raising John, supporting him, loving him unconditionally. I thought about all the moments in my life that had been overshadowed by the demands of others, the moments when I had put my own needs aside. And then I thought about Evelyn, the woman who had wormed her way into my son's life and now controlled everything. She had taken advantage of my kindness, and now, it was time to take a stand. The evening before our planned dinner, I sat at the kitchen table, the papers I had signed earlier that week resting in front of me. I had decided to tell them everything. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to let Evelyn continue to manipulate me. The next day, I waited. I knew the moment would come when they would both walk through that door, thinking everything was fine, expecting me to be the same old mother they had always known. But this time, I was different. When John and Evelyn arrived, the air in the room felt different. I could sense the unease between us, the unspoken tension hanging in the air. We sat down at the table, and for the first time in a long while, I looked at them both. Evelyn's eyes flickered to me, but she quickly looked away, her lips pressed together in a thin line. John, on the other hand, seemed nervous, shifting in his seat, avoiding my gaze. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I broke it. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. John looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's going on, Mom? Is everything okay?" "No," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Not everything is okay. I've been keeping quiet for too long, but I'm done now." Evelyn stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm talking about everything," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "The way you've treated me, the way you've pushed me aside, the way you've tried to take everything from me." John looked shocked, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you've been pushed aside?" she said, her tone mocking. "You're just upset because things aren't going the way you want them to." "No," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I'm upset because I've been made to feel like I don't matter, like I'm invisible in my own family." I could see the shift in John's expression, the confusion giving way to something else, guilt, maybe. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, stopping him. "It's too late for apologies, John," I said. "I've been patient, but I'm not going to sit here and let you and Evelyn take what's mine." The words hung in the air. Between us, heavy and final. I could see the uncertainty in John's eyes, and I knew then that everything was about to change. The silence that followed my words felt like a heavy weight pressing down on the room. John and Evelyn sat there, stunned, not sure how to respond. I could see the gears turning in John's mind, the realization dawning on him that things were about to change. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands resting on the table, but he didn't say a word. Evelyn, on the other hand, crossed her arms, her expression hardening, but there was something in her eyes, an unsettling flicker of uncertainty. It was the first time I'd seen that look from her, and I wasn't sure whether it was fear or just anger. I didn't care. For once, I wasn't afraid. I had spent too many years fearing their judgments, their opinions, their power over me. But that was over. "You've been taking advantage of me for too long, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady, even though I could feel the rush of adrenaline. "And you've been letting her, John." I turned to face him directly. "You've let her push me out of this family, out of my own home." John finally opened his mouth, but his words were slow, hesitant. "Mom, I didn't know it was like this." "I didn't." "No, you didn't," I interrupted, not letting him finish. "You didn't because you never wanted to know. You were too busy with your own life, with your wife, to see what was happening right in front of you. You didn't care." John winced at my words, but Evelyn's expression only grew colder. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice sharp, almost hissing. "You're just upset because you don't get what you want. You're being dramatic, just like always." I could feel my blood boil at her words, but I held myself together. "Dramatic? Is that what you think this is? I've spent my life supporting you both, making sure you had everything you needed, and this is how you repay me?" I paused, trying to calm my racing thoughts. "You think I'm just some old woman who doesn't matter, but I do. I always have." There was a long pause, the air thick with tension. I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall, each second stretching. On forever. Finally, John spoke again, his voice softer this time. "What do you want, Mom? What do you expect from us?" His question was sincere, but I knew it was a little too late for apologies. "What do I want?" I echoed, letting the question hang in the air. "I want respect. I want to be treated like a person, like a member of this family, not like some burden that you can shove aside whenever it's convenient for you." John looked at me, his face filled with a mix of guilt and confusion. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words sounding hollow. I could see that he wasn't really seeing me, not truly. He was seeing his mother, the woman he had always known, the woman who had never caused him any trouble. But things were different now. "I don't want your apology, John," I said firmly. "What I want is for you to finally see what's been happening, to see what you've allowed her to do. I'm done pretending that everything is fine when it isn't." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her gaze flicking between John and me, but she quickly regained her composure. "You're being irrational," she said, her voice cold, almost calculating. "You're not going to get anything from us by making threats." "It's not a threat," I said, leaning forward, my eyes locking with hers. "It's a promise. I'm not going to stand by and let you take everything I've worked for. Not without a fight." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was no sound but the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. I felt something shift in me, something that had been dormant for too long. The fear, the hesitation, it was gone. What was left was a woman who knew exactly what she had to do. "You think you've won," I said softly, turning my attention back to John. "But you haven't. You've just made me realize how much I've allowed myself to be treated like I don't matter. I won't make that mistake again." John didn't say anything, but I could see that the wheels were turning in his head. Evelyn was still staring at me, but now, there was something in her expression I hadn't seen before. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but for the first time, I saw doubt creeping into her eyes. The game had changed, and I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. The following days were a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. I had made my decision, and now, I was waiting for the right moment to make it known. I knew the confrontation with John and Evelyn would come soon. They couldn't avoid it any longer. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about respect, about dignity, about the years I had given to this family. The weight of it all sat heavily on my shoulders, but I stood firm. I had spent so much of my life making sacrifices for others, but I couldn't keep doing it anymore. It was my turn to stand up for myself. The phone rang late one afternoon, interrupting the silence of my thoughts. I picked it up, knowing it was John. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, almost guilty. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Of course, John. I don't know what's going on with you and Evelyn," he continued, "but I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I need to understand what's happening." "You're right," I said calmly. "Things haven't been okay for a long time." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of his confusion, but I didn't care. I had reached my limit. "You and Evelyn have been making decisions about me and about this family without even consulting me," I continued, my voice steady. "I've had enough." "What do you mean?" John asked, his voice tightening with concern. "What decisions? You think I don't know what's been going on?" I asked, feeling the anger start to rise. "I've been pushed aside, ignored, and manipulated for far too long." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom," he said, his voice softening. "You never meant to hurt me? That's the problem, John," I said, my words cutting through the air. "You never cared enough to really see what was happening. You were too busy living your own life with Evelyn." The silence between us was heavy, but I wasn't going to back down. I had already made up my mind. "I've given everything for this family," I said, the words almost choking me. "I've given my time, my energy, my love. And what do I have to show for it? Nothing." "Mom, please," he said, his voice filled with frustration, but also something else. Was it guilt? Regret? "I'm sorry for not being there. I never meant for you to feel this way." "I don't want your apologies, John," I replied. "I want change. I want to be treated with the respect I deserve. I'm done being overlooked, done being pushed aside." There was another long pause. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to piece together what I was saying. "So what do you want me to do?" he asked finally, his voice weary. "I want you to stand up for me," I said firmly. "I want you to stand up to Evelyn and make her understand that I'm not just some old woman to be tossed aside. I want my place in this family back." I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. "I'll talk to her," he said quietly. "But you have to understand, things have changed. We can't go back to the way things were." "I know," I said, my heart heavy. "But I'm not asking for the past. I'm asking for respect. And I'm asking you to see me for who I really am, not just the person you think I am." There was another pause, longer this time, and I wondered if he would truly do what I asked. "I'll do what I can," he said finally, his voice uncertain. "But I can't promise everything will be okay." "I don't need promises," I said, my voice steady. "I just need you to finally see me." The conversation ended soon after that, and I was left alone with my thoughts once again. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. I had made it clear where I stood. Now, it was up to them to decide what kind of family they wanted to be. But I wasn't going to wait around for their decision any longer. I had already made mine. The next few days felt like they stretched on forever. I had said what needed to be said to John, but the uncertainty still lingered in the air. It was like waiting for a storm that hadn't yet arrived, but you could feel it coming. Evelyn was quieter now, her cold demeanor replaced by something more calculated, as if she was waiting for the perfect moment to make her move. I knew she wouldn't give up easily, but I was prepared for whatever she had planned. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I heard the familiar sound of the front door opening. John had come home, but this time, something felt different. He walked into the room slowly, his face unreadable. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. I knew this conversation was coming, but I didn't expect it so soon. I put down the book I had been reading and looked up at him, trying to keep my composure. "What's going on, John?" I asked, my voice calm, though I could feel my nerves starting to tighten. He took a deep breath, his eyes not meeting mine. "I spoke with Evelyn," he said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "She's not happy with the way things have been going, and neither am I." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, "Evelyn doesn't understand why you're doing all this. Why you're making everything so difficult." I could feel my stomach churn at his words, but I didn't let it show. "It's not difficult, John," I said, my voice steady. "It's about respect. I'm not going to sit around and let Evelyn push me aside anymore. I've given everything for this family, and I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter." There was a long pause, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I know you feel that way, Mom," he said, his voice softening. "But this is a lot to ask. You're asking me to choose between you and her." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had hoped he wouldn't say it, but deep down, I knew it was coming. "You're not choosing, John," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to see the truth. To see what she's been doing all along." He shook his head, a look of frustration crossing his face. "I don't know what you want me to do, Mom. I can't just throw Evelyn aside." I stood up then, my legs feeling unsteady but my resolve stronger than ever. "You don't have to throw her aside, John," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "But you have to understand that I'm your mother. I've been here for you your entire life. And now, I need you to be here for me." The silence that followed was deafening. John looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and guilt. I could see him struggling with the weight of what I was asking, but I couldn't back down now. "I've done everything for you, John. I've given up my own happiness for your family. And now, I'm not going to stand by while Evelyn makes all the decisions. This is my life, too." He didn't respond at first, but I could see him processing my words, the gears turning in his mind. "I need time to think," he said finally, his voice low. "I don't know what to say." I nodded, knowing that the conversation wasn't over. But I had said what needed to be said, and now, I had to wait for him to figure out where he stood. As he left the room, I sat back down, my thoughts swirling. This wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many things left unsaid, so many obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own life. And no matter how hard it was, I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The days after that conversation felt like they were moving in slow motion. I could tell that John was still struggling with what I had said, but I also knew that he had to come to terms with it in his own way. Evelyn, however, remained quiet. It was as if she was biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. I had been preparing for this, knowing that she wouldn't let things go so easily. But what I didn't expect was how quickly things would escalate. One evening, as I sat in the living room, lost in my thoughts, the doorbell rang. I stood up, wondering who it could be at this hour. When I opened the door, there stood Evelyn, her face as cold as ever. "We need to talk," she said, her tone sharp. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The last time we had spoken, there had been tension, but now it felt even thicker. I could tell that she was angry, but I wasn't sure if it was directed at me or at the situation she found herself in. We stood in the middle of the living room, the silence between us almost suffocating. "What is it that you want, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice steady. She took a deep breath before speaking, her words measured but full of venom. I don't understand why you're doing this. Why now? Why all of a sudden are you causing such a scene? I crossed my arms, not backing down. Because I've had enough, I said. Enough of being treated like I don't matter. Enough of being pushed aside. Evelyn scoffed, rolling her eyes. You're making everything so dramatic. John doesn't need this right now. He's trying to do his best, and you're just making it harder for him. You've been making it harder for me, Evelyn. I replied, my voice firm. For years, you've been undermining me, making decisions without me. You've pushed me out of this family, and now you expect me to just sit back and take it. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked around the room, as if trying to find something to focus on other than me. I could see the frustration building in her, but I wasn't going to let her win this time. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my words clear and final. I'm staying right here, and I'm going to make sure that John sees the truth. I'm not just some old woman who's invisible to you anymore. Evelyn took a step forward, her face twisted in anger. You think you're going to win this? You think John's going to choose you over me? I'm not trying to make him choose, I replied. But I am going to make sure he sees what you've been doing. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. I could feel the tension rising, but I knew I couldn't back down now. I had fought too long for this family to just let it fall apart because of one person's manipulation. Evelyn finally broke the silence, her voice low but filled with threat. You don't know what you're messing with, Margaret, she said, her eyes narrowing. You think you have control, but you don't. John will always be mine. We'll see about that, I said, my voice cold and steady. But I'm not backing down. Not this time. She glared at me one last time before turning and walking toward the door. You'll regret this, she muttered as she stepped out into the hallway. I watched her go, but I didn't feel fear. For the first time in years, I felt in control. The battle was far from over, but it had started, and I wasn't going to let her win. I knew what I had to do now. It wasn't just about taking a stand for myself. It was about showing John that the woman he had married wasn't the person she pretended to be. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I met with my lawyer again, reviewing everything, making sure I was ready. I wasn't going to let Evelyn manipulate me anymore, and I wasn't going to let her tear apart what little was left of my relationship with John. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was time to fight back. The first step was taking back what was mine, and I was ready. The final showdown was coming, and I was prepared to face whatever came my way. The days that followed were full of a quiet anticipation, like standing at the edge of a precipice, waiting for the inevitable. I had made my decision, and now there was no turning back. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever, each day stretching on as I waited for John to come to terms with the conversation we'd had. Evelyn, though, remained as distant and cold as ever. I could feel her watching me, her eyes like daggers, but she said nothing. She was waiting for me to make the next move. I was sure of it. I had no intentions of letting her control the situation any longer. But what would John do? That was the question I kept asking myself. As much as I tried to prepare myself for it, I couldn't predict how he would react when he finally saw the truth. The afternoon of the planned meeting arrived, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had gone over everything with my lawyer. I had everything in order, every document ready. It wasn't just about the money or the house anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about respect, about taking back the dignity that Evelyn had stripped away. When John arrived at the house, he looked weary, his face drawn with the weight of the decisions he had to make. He didn't say anything at first. He simply walked into the living room and sat down, his eyes meeting mine briefly before he looked away. I could feel the tension in the air as we sat there in silence. I waited for him to speak. Mom, he began finally, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and about Evelyn. My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I had been waiting for. And I asked, keeping my voice calm. And I think you were right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been so caught up in my life with her that I didn't see how much I was neglecting you, how much I was letting her control everything. The words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I had spent so long trying to get him to see it, and now, finally, he was starting to understand. I'm sorry, he said, his eyes filled with regret. I don't know what I was thinking. I should have been there for you. I should have seen what was happening. I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. John, I said softly, it's not too late to make things right. But you have to stand up to her. You have to stop letting Evelyn manipulate you. Stop letting her tear this family apart. He nodded slowly, his hands clenched in his lap. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not going to let her control me anymore. I looked at him, studying his face, trying to see if this was real. Are you sure about that? I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes finally meeting mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. I'm sure, he said. I've let her get away with too much, and I've let it hurt you. But I won't do that anymore. The room seemed to shift in that moment. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. I had my son back, at least in some way. And Evelyn, well, I wasn't done with her yet. But I could see now that the balance of power was shifting. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would still be battles ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. John and I were going to take back control of this family, one step at a time. And Evelyn would have to face the consequences of her actions. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time.